At 4ZZZ, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we broadcast. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Jagera people. We acknowledge that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded.
And we stand in solidarity with them.
Tranzmission on 4ZZZ, amplifying the trans and gender diverse community of Meanjin, Brisbane and beyond. Woo! Oh, good morning Meanjin. You're listening to Tranzmission on 4ZZZ. Oh, the greatest radio station that ever was and that ever will be. You should subscribe to keep it alive, as usual, 4ZZZ.org.au/support. My name is Ez. I use he, him pronouns. If you were unfamiliar with the state of the US, well, particularly for trans people, you're going to hear all about it today. I would probably give a bit of a caution to this episode, some trigger warnings and themes. We will be touching on transphobia, queerphobia, displacement, as well as talks around genocide and murder. So those things are pretty heavy. In retrospect, looking back on this interview that I recorded with Fae, Fae is not live in the studio with me, but I had a chat with her last week. Fae is our New York-based correspondent, and she's just so wonderful. And this show is actually called Community is the Antidote. We have what we need to survive. This is actually a show about hope, despite that trigger warning. It is actually a show about hope, and it is about joy, and it is about thriving, and I'm so excited to play it for you. So before we get straight into it, let's check in with Elliot for the week in community news.
Hello, this is Elliot, and I'm bringing you your news today for the 11th of May 2026. Transgender civil rights lawyer named in the Time 100 list. Prominent transgender civil rights lawyer Shannon Minter has been named one of the world's most influential people on the annual Time 100 list. Minter is the long-time legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights and has spent more than 3 decades working on landmark LGBTQIA+ rights cases across the United States. Most recently, he has been involved in Talbot vs. USA, representing transgender service members challenging attempts by President Donald Trump to reinstate a ban on transgender people serving in the military. Speaking about the recognition, Minter said the honour reflects the seriousness of the current political climate as much as his own achievements. He said growing mainstream attention to transgender issues shows that the experiences and rights of trans people are increasingly being recognised and taken seriously. Advocates have described Minter's inclusion on the Time 100 list as a significant moment for transgender visibility and civil rights advocacy during a period of ongoing political debate in the United States. UK Doctors Union drops opposition to CAS review. The British Medical Association has announced it no longer opposes the controversial CAS review into gender healthcare for children and young people in the United Kingdom. The medical union had previously criticised the review's findings as unsubstantiated and voted in 2024 to oppose its implementation. However, a new internal evaluation led by Professor David Strain has concluded that the review's methodology was robust, with the BMA stating that it does not fundamentally oppose any of the report's 32 recommendations. Despite the shift, the BMA says it still opposes government restrictions preventing doctors from prescribing puberty blockers, arguing that clinicians should retain medical autonomy in carefully managed cases. The CAS review, led by paediatrician Hilary Cass, prompted major changes to NHS gender services and has remained deeply divisive among doctors, researchers, and transgender advocacy groups. Brisbane queer venue responds defiantly after alleged homophobic attack. A Brisbane LGBTQIA+ venue is raising funds and increasing security after an alleged homophobic vandalism attack earlier this week. West End bar Come to Daddy says a group attempted to burn pride flag bunting outside the venue overnight, destroying decorations and damaging signage. Staff say neighbours alerted them to the incident and helped them clean up the debris. In response, the venue has launched a fundraiser for security cameras, lighting and repairs, while also calling on the community to donate more pride flags and decorations. Venue organisers say the attack was not just against property, but against queer visibility and community safety. In a statement online, they vowed to respond by making the venue even more gayer, describing the space as an important community hub for LGBTQIA+ people in Brisbane. The incident comes amid broader concerns about rising hostility towards queer communities, with advocates calling for greater attention to targeted attacks on LGBTQIA+ venues both in Australia and internationally. Voting opens for the 2026 Queen's Ball Community Awards. The 2026 Queen's Ball Award celebrates the outstanding contributions to Queensland's LGBTQIA+ community across activism, arts, nightlife, media, and community service. Organisers say the annual awards recognise the people and organisations helping to shape queer culture and advocacy across the state, with community members encouraged to cast their votes online ahead of the ceremony later this year. Among this year's nominees are several familiar voices from community radio. Transmission investigative journalist and grassroots agitator Bet has been nominated for Activist of the Year, while Brody from Queer Radio as well as Transmission host Ez have both received nominations for Volunteer of the Year. If you'd like to vote for your favourite 4ZZZ superstars, head to the Brisbane Pride website, brisbanepride.org.au, or you can head to the Transmission socials at transwithaz.radio. Community service announcement, Morph Micro Grants. Applications are now open for Morph Micro Grants, offering $200 grants to support transgender, gender diverse, and non-binary people accessing gender-affirming care. The grants can help cover costs including binders, tucking underwear, laser hair removal, initial hormone therapy consultations, ongoing HRT expenses, specialist appointments, and other forms of affirming care that help people feel safer, more comfortable, and supported in their gender journey. Morph organisers say the aim is to remove financial barriers that may be preventing people from accessing care and support that they need. Applicants are encouraged to share how the funding would support them, along with a rough breakdown of costs and when the support would be needed. Applications are now open through the official form at Morph Microgrants application form on their social media at Morph the Event. Morph, M-O-R-P-H, the event. That's all for our news this week. I'm Elliot. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much, Elliot. Love that. So much news. So much happening. We are now about to dive into a interview that I did with Fae, who is a New York-based correspondent for Transmission. She's just so wonderful, and she's like giving us on-the-ground experiences of what she's feeling, how community feels, and yeah, sharing her thoughts. That's the entire episode today, and it's a bit of fun. I did give a warning earlier a little bit about it, but just, yeah, keep in mind that we are going to touch on some pretty heavy themes. When we talk about trans lives in this current day, there's always some heavy themes involved. So look after yourselves out there. Also, yeah, let's just dive straight into it and enjoy. This week's episode is called We Have What We Need to Survive. Right now, in the United States, trans communities are facing an escalating wave of political attacks, from healthcare bans to restrictions on public life, driven in mostly by the rise of movements like Trumpism, MAGA, and anti-trans medical bodies such as SEGM. However, this episode isn't just about what we're up against, it's about what we already have. Today, I'm joined by Fae, Transmission's New York-based correspondent. Together, we're talking survival, resistance, and the power of community in the face of it all. Fae, how are you? Tell us how you're doing.
I'm doing very well. I have switched over to estrogen injections for about a month now, which has been absolutely amazing.
Ooh, no more morning pills.
Yes. Yes, no more estrogen pills, a bunch of other pills, but I am feeling really great. I'm really excited about this conversation. Things in New York are complicated, as frankly they kind of always are. You know, New York is a very interesting creature, especially politically. It has a very, very vibrant, radical, grassroots political scene. And very much a trans sort of enclave within the U.S. But also our politics are often directed by wealth. You know, Wall Street is also based here. And so it's been a really fascinating time to see how everyone is reacting to the current climate we find ourselves in. So, but I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so happy to have you here. And you know, New York's got some things going for it right now too. You know, is it Mamdani? That guy's great. Love watching him. And I'm pretty sure he also appointed a trans woman for LGBTQ plus.
Yes. So I have a very complicated view of the mayor. Something I like to say is, you know, as a New Yorker, it's my God-given right to hate the mayor. I want to be clear. I do not hate Mandami. I have a lot of issues with him. I think there are things he is doing very well, and there are things where he could be doing a lot more. Mount Sinai and NYU stopping trans kids' healthcare without a court order or anything is a really big issue. And while I am not blind to the fact that that is a state level issue because it's against New York state laws and not exactly a New York City effort, I think it is, I'll put it this way. We know when he wants to operate with efficiency and speed, and it is very clear when he doesn't want to do that. And I personally, I can speak for no one but myself, feel that how he is reacting to trans issues right now leaves a lot to be desired. Even if his hands may be tied, I think he could be doing a lot more optically, if nothing else.
Yeah, just damn, it's just another politician. It happens.
You know, something I like to say is I've never been served wrong by never trusting a politician.
And that's a great premise to begin our conversation on, especially given how the context of what's happening in the US overall, you know, we're going to be predominantly focusing at, well, we are focusing on the trans community and trans experiences. However, you know, with the rise of Trumpism, fascism, the MAGA movement, and the last decade of US politics has been so almost black and white and here in Australia, watching from afar, it's kind of like watching a train wreck in a way, because I feel like, at least for the communities that I'm in, watching what's happening in the US is like watching a football game, right? Where you're like, you're actually you're not a player. You're not a player on the field, but you're watching it happen, and you're yelling at the screen going, pass the ball over here. No, what are you doing? You know, oh, you're going the wrong way. And then inevitably
Totally.
you lose each match and you're like, damn it, gosh, what, I just like that.
No, completely. You know, I don't like the fact that what happens in the United States affects the world, but it does. You know, it's the state we find ourselves in. A lot of people take cues from where things are going in the U.S. You know, but also some of this stuff is also worldwide. You know, I think there's a strong argument to be made that like a lot of the turn towards right wing stuff started in Europe.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then eventually was imported to the US. And, you know, and the US for sure exports a lot of that around the world. At the same time, I think we are starting to see some of the early signs of that sort of right-wing trend ending, which is a huge opportunity. Yeah.
Opportunity. I like the sound of that. There's opportunity for here. What's next, you know?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm into it. So across the US, trans people are facing a growing wave of legislative attacks targeting healthcare, education, and the right to exist openly in public life. Laws restricting access to gender-affirming care, particularly for young trans people, are being introduced and passed across multiple states, alongside efforts to push trans people out of schools, public spaces, and everyday life. These attacks are unfolding within a broader political climate shaped by right-wing organizing and rhetoric, including the ongoing influence of Trump-aligned politics and the MAGA movement. And the impact is already being felt. We have been feeling it for a long time. Trans journalist Erin Reed shows that an estimated of 400,000 trans people, around 9% of the trans population in the US, have moved states since the election in 2024. Many forced to leave homes, jobs, and communities in search of safety. This isn't theoretical. This isn't distant. For many, survival now means displacement, uprooting your life simply to access care, to feel safe, or to exist. But even in the face of this, trans communities continue to do what they have always done, which is organize, care for one another, and fight to survive. So, Faye, do you want to start us off? Can you paint a bit of a picture of what the political climate is, probably more broadly across the US? I mean, we did talk about it a little bit before, but do you want to give a sort of summary of how this sort of feels?
It is a time of both immense fear and also immense joy. Those things are both coexisting at the same time. You know, as much as there are all these anti-trans bills around the entire country, passing bathroom bills, the federal government inspecting a lot more things, which I do not want to diminish any of that. That is all very real. It is ruining lives. It is forcing people, like you said, to displace themselves in just a pursuit of being able to live safely. I consider myself extremely lucky that I am in New York City, which is a sanctuary city, has a vibrant trans community and a lot of support for the trans community from, grassroots organizations and institutions and groups and all of that sort of stuff. But also, we've never been more visible. Our stories, while hard to tell, have never been more accessible. And there's a lot of work happening with that. There's I can just off the top of my head, Lily Wachowski is executive producing a lot of trans feature films and helping them get distribution and things that even 3 years ago would have been unheard of. Just things that weren't happening, like any marginalized group, we find our own and we celebrate it. I think one of the biggest things, and we're going to talk about this obviously more later, I think about this saying from the heights of the AIDS crisis, which was, we would bury our friends during the day and then party all night. We'd protest during the day, go to funerals, and then go and have fun, go dancing, go see trans queer musicians celebrating what our lives are. Because while there is so much sadness, like I was saying, and so much strife, there is also so much joy. I know the feeling I have about myself, even though my life has never been harder. I would never go back. I would never go back into the closet because I've never been happier in my own skin. I've never felt more comfort and love from my community. The way we find each other, whether it's distant and on social media or, in person, these are the things that keep us going. These are the things worth fighting for.
I remember when I first called you, oh gosh, when did I call you last? Maybe like last month sometime. And I was just like, how are you? Like, how are you doing? I haven't spoken to you in a while. And you were like, I'm actually feeling really empowered by this change. Like, I feel like we can, like, there's something good here. Like we're going to thrive. We're going to make it, And I was just like, that is so nice to hear an American trans person say that. And that, that's obviously inspired this conversation that we're having today. But with that in mind, I was looking at this trans legislation tracker, which I'll put some links in the show notes as well for people to take a look. But the data in that shows huge numbers of anti-trans bills across the US. And I guess, when you look at the data, you're like, oh my gosh, this looks horrendous. But how is that actually showing up day to day in people's lives? Like, how are you finding that?
There are good days and bad days. I think for all of us, we sometimes, I know it can be overwhelming and it can be way, way too much. But the thing is, the bad days aren't all the same. And what I mean by that is when I'm having a bad day, some of my friends might be having good days and I can rely on them. I can confide in them. I can vent to them. I can cry to them, and they can remind me of things that I've done or things that are going on that are good, that are spots of hope, because there are serious, very real spots of hope going on right now. It is, while there can be some people who deny what is happening to trans people in America, there are also plenty of people who know exactly what is going on. I think about the bombings in London when that was happening during World War II, the air raids and all that, that there were people who, were in psychiatric facilities, and then they had to drive an ambulance around, and they had never been doing better because they had a purpose. There was something that needed to be done, and they were doing it. I was reading a study, and this has nothing to do with trans issues, that was talking about the mental and emotional benefits of cooking a meal for someone. And what it was talking about was the ways that when you cook for someone, the ways that, being gracious, preparing helping someone out, being of service to someone else, and then, giving them that food, seeing the enjoyment from the food that they're eating, the conversations that you have, it helps both people out. It's not just a one-way street. And I'm seeing a lot of that in day to day. I'm seeing a lot of people, often when I talk to somebody and confide into someone I'm very close to, they will tell me, they'll ask me, hey, do you feel better? Where are you at, Faye? And, it helps. And they go, talking to you about this, helping you figure this out, helped me. Because, like I said, not everyone's bad days are the same bad days. We all have good days and bad days. And seeing the resilience that is in our community, like you said, the conviction, because anyone who's trans knows this, but realizing you're trans is hard. Telling other people you are trans is even harder. We all are relying on each other, and we're all seeing the greatness in each other, that we are overcoming these odds, that we are going, you know what? I am here. I am not going anywhere, and I'm going to do what needs to be done.
I'm going to live authentically, and, F the system. Living authentically is the only way that I live. It's this
Exactly.
It's the purest path line to like existence, and it's the only one that we're in tune with as trans people. I think it's just like I'm either dead or I'm doing this. That's what it came down to for me, and I feel like, and it's community, right? Too, like the way that you're saying, how we share a meal and how we prepare for each other. Like every time we give to each other, it comes back around, and that giving comes to us, and it's community. That's how we navigate all this stuff right now, right? Is with community. I was reading, like I've been doing so much research for the chat today, and I was looking at the National Center for Transgender Equality, and they're looking at how all these laws and things have been impacting healthcare and safety, but also the human rights campaign, which is that there's a gap of understanding between public understanding and the reality of trans lives. And I guess, like, how do you see misinformation shaping what's happening there politically? Because obviously, it's definitely impacting us here, misinformation. But what's it like for you? I feel like your phones get different things from Australian phones, like this algorithmically.
Oh, I'm sure we do. I'm sure we do. I think one of the biggest things of misinformation is, I think I'm in New York. That's a bubble unto itself. And I'm in the trans community in New York, which is another smaller bubble unto itself. But, I am not someone who only has trans and queer friends. I have cis friends. I have hetero friends. I think everyone understands that the trans community is under attack right now. But I think the biggest thing that people don't understand, the degree to which we are under attack right now. There are the Lemkin Institute has put out at least 3, I think 4 red flags warnings for genocide for trans Americans. And that means a lot of different things. I want to be very clear in what I'm saying. There are degrees to genocide. Am I saying what is happening to trans people in America is equal to the genocide that has happened in Palestine? Absolutely not. I want to be very, very clear about that. That doesn't mean it's not happening here to lesser degrees. I just want to be very, very clear about that. And I'm not trying to say it's 1-to-1, because it is not. It just isn't.
There are totally different ways of performing it too, right? Like there's mass scale bombing and killing children and an entire racial group. There's a racial element there as well as a geographical element, whereas trans people are such a small percentage of the population too, right? And also and
we're so spread out.
Yeah. Yes. And also not racial, we're not a racial group. And also we're spread out globally and not in a region. But what's happening in the US, you can definitely see like this migration pathways of people moving from like red states to blue states to and not just trans people, trans families with trans children who are like, what do I do for my kid? We're in Florida. We have to get out of here. It's dangerous to be a parent supporting my trans child right now. So that's a huge displacement. That's That's you have to migrate, you have to immigrate somewhere for your safety. That's something that you can draw a parallel between what's happening in any kind of genocide. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I would implore the Lemkin Institute is the one I know the best, but there's a lot of, you can look up the Lemkin Institute online, and they have a stages of genocide. And I would implore everyone to look at that to just understand sort of what I am talking about here, because it's a very, very in-depth. There's a lot, and that's not what we're talking about today. I think there is a lot of people, the amount of times I have had a conversation that basically goes, well, if it was that bad, I would hear about it. And I can't say this to the cis person I'm talking to, but I'm like, you are right now. I'm the one telling you about it.
You're hearing it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, like I understand that. Like, listen, we're all ignorant about all sorts of different things, especially things that don't directly affect us. And I wouldn't, but when someone is telling you, I don't know how you go, no, that, well, I would have heard about it. You are right now. And it's complicated because, like, something I think is very true is no one in the US is having a good last 12 months. It's been rough for everybody. Now, the ways it has been rough is going to be very dependent on your axis of oppression, how much privilege you may or may not have. It is very easy, and the US is so individualistic. It's deeply individualistic in culture, but also in outlook. It's very, and I think this is to some degree also just human nature. It is hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes to see how someone else might, well, if it's bad for me, it can't be that much worse for you. And while unemployment in the US for everyone is really bad, when you look at trans unemployment, especially trans women unemployment, that's before you get into like black trans women's unemployment, that's close to Great Depression numbers. There's not a federal moratorium on hiring trans people, but it feels like there is. And that's before you even get into, like, people transition, they get kicked out of their job. Something I think is that, like, a lot of people view a trans person having a job as charity, as opposed to you're employed and doing a job, so I should be getting paid for that job. There's this very weird way people look at it. I will sometimes be having conversations with liberals about what is going on, and there's this very weird patronizing thing. Now, it's, at the end of the day, that's coming from transphobia, but not being able even to see how, hey, you're talking down to me when I'm trying to tell you what's going on and how this is affecting my community. It's a very weird thing. And again, if you're not treating someone's marginalization with the respect and dignity it deserves, you are being bigoted towards that person. It's not the same as other bigotries that are a lot more, I think, easy to call out. In the US, it's been massively regressive for the last 10 years. It really feels like we kind of stomped out people saying the R slur, and I hear it all the time now. Just for another marginalized community, example of something they're dealing with.
I was actually doing some reading, and I was looking at the Australian Human Rights Institute, which actually shows that support for trans people and broadly queer people, even with the increase of anti-trans laws and hate campaigns, that support for the community is actually growing in the US. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's happening?
I do not think hyper visibility is a sword. I do not think hyper invisibility is a shield, but I do think there's a couple things going on. I think, one, you have some people who see the injustice that's happening and go, I don't like that. I'm going to support my trans friends and queer friends more. I think that's one explanation. That as we are treated so overtly hostily, people go, hey, fuck that.
Yeah.
The other thing is there has never been more of us. I think there's a lot of equivalence to be drawn between where gay people, were in the 90s and where trans people are right now. It used to be if you were gay, you weren't allowed to be a school teacher. Now, and I'm not saying that gay people who are teachers don't get shit. They do. I am very aware of that fact. But it is not we have to fire you because you're gay. There's also trans teachers now in middle schools and high schools and in elementary schools. It is harder to demonize people when someone goes, hey, I know someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be a family member. It may be someone's friend, or, as more and more of us come out, it is harder to make up lies about us because it's just so demonstrably not true. Also, we've never been in the media this is representation is not the end all be all, but it is important to see people living differently, having a different experience, which will affect the storylines in media, if assuming they're portrayed honestly, which I think trans people are no longer the butt of a joke. As someone who grew up in the 90s, let me tell you, a comedy show in the 90s is hard to watch now. We are characters. We get to embody ourselves instead of weird caricatures that is a cis person half the time. It actually not almost 95% of the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've just taken such a great pivot. I think, we don't give enough credit to time and the efforts of the shoulders of giants. These activists, the representation that we've had in the past. Like you look at Marsha P. Johnson, and all these incredible. There's all this incredible representation and visibility. It is actually working. We are still oppressed, and we're still experiencing oppression and discrimination and the threat of violence daily. However, surprisingly, it is, as you said before, it is getting better. We are actually there's joy to be had here, and there's a life. Like the amount of trans kids that I see now, the amount of alternative presentations that young people have, gives me hope. We've been chatting about what's been going on in the US for the trans community, but more broadly talking about hope, where we've come from, where we're going, and what's going on. And part of that, to understand the moment that we're in, we also need to understand the history that came before it. Because trans people have never just been passive in the face of oppression, and we ain't about to start now. There's a long, powerful history of resistance here. So, Faye, when we talk about trans history in the US, I think a lot of people immediately think of Stonewall. I mean, I think most people globally might even think of Stonewall. But what do you think people misunderstand about that moment? What do you think people are missing?
I think one of the biggest things that people are missing is while the Stonewall riots, and I think it's important to say, the first Pride was a riot. People know the names of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, but a lot of people forget that Stonewall started with trans women of color. The entire gay movement started because trans women of color stood up and said, enough is enough. We are done. We are not being treated like this anymore.
Because those were the people that were like the first to be ending up in the back of the cop cars, the paddy wagons from the gay clubs. I mean, and they were the first. Yeah.
Back then, if you were not dressed in clothes that assigned that matched your gender, your sex, you would get arrested. Trans people were the first people to get arrested. It's also, I think, really important to point out that, a lot of the trans people who started this movement were sex workers out of survival, fighting being unhoused, not people with means. People who were on the outskirts of society and said, we're not taking this anymore. That's where it started. It started in the streets. It didn't start in a boardroom. There was no institution that said, we are stopping this right now. And the thing is, that isn't to say that there weren't gay organizations back then. At the time of Stonewall, there was the Mattachine Society, which was an explicitly assimilationist group. They aren't around anymore. That strategy did not work then. The Mattachine Society was, don't quote me on this, but I am 90% sure that it was basically all upper class, rich, white gay men who were trying to say, we are respectable. We aren't like those other queers. And I think that's an important thing to realize, is that there have always been reactionary queers. There have always been queers who want to acquiesce or compromise with power. But I think it's important to point out that the liberation movements that work, that have success, are maximalist, are going, no, you are going to accept me on my terms, not yours, not the powers that be's terms.
Yeah, I'm not
Because
approximating myself to power. I want power to disseminate and recognize my power and my authenticity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, there's always this question, you know, it can get drummed down to a very almost token conversation of like kink at pride, you know, of maybe we shouldn't have this or whatever. But the leather daddies, the perverts, are why we have rights. It is not the people who wanted to dress up nicely in suits. That's not why we have rights. We have rights because the people who were pushed out went, enough is enough, and I'm not taking this anymore. And now, that was not one person. That was not 5 people. That was a group of people going, we're not taking it. A critical mass occurred. And that is what started the movement. I have been very lucky enough. I got to meet a gay man who was at Stonewall, and I got to talk to him about this, and they never stopped fighting. They were there and they were going. Now, they were taking shifts, so to speak. You know, hey, crash at my... He lived in the neighborhood at the time, and he would have people over to sleep, and then they would go back to the riot. You can't pour from an empty vessel.
Yeah.
You know? You have to make sure you're filled to be able to pour out to others who need it.
Yeah. Historically as well, you know, there are so many lessons in that we can take now for our quote unquote modern fight, or this ongoing war that has always kind of been there, that we win some battles and we lose some battles. But overall, we've still been fighting this whole time, generationally. So what do you think are some lessons from past trans and queer movements that feel most important for us to hold right now?
I think some of the most important things are to remember, like I was saying before, it's not just one person. It is not just you. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. There will always be more people against us than there are of you. And every person needs to figure out their avenue of attack, so to speak. Act Up is I think a really, really good template for this, because they did a lot of street actions. They did a lot of demonstrations. You know what they also did? They helped find people to care for people dying of AIDS who could not go to these actions. They made sure that people had food, had medicine. And that's not the same the person who's going to hit the phone tree is not the same person who is going to be at an action. But without that person running the phone tree, that person isn't showing up to the action. And so we all have our own part to play. We all have what we are, some people are good at talking to people. Some people are good at making really good spreadsheets and organization and logistics.
And we need that. We need that.
and some people are really good at being intimidating, and maybe they should go be on the front lines when cops are going to be showing up. It is a big attitude I have is multi-pronged. Find your avenue. Find what you are good at, what the movement, what your local group needs. Mutual aid is an amazing example of this. Before it was just called community outreach in some cases, but finding the thing that you are able to help others. I have a saying I like to say that I think really applies here. No one can save everyone, but everyone can save someone. And that can be big, from letting a trans girl, crash on your couch, hiring a trans person for a job because where you work gives pretty good benefits and it covers trans healthcare, that sort of thing. It also can be the small thing of talking to someone when they're having a panic attack about the state of the world and giving them space to ground themselves.
Even just
know?
the act of being like, did you want a warm drink? Did you want some water? Like, just because giving something little can change the entire course of someone's day. So it's the small acts of kindness. It's a smile at the train station, or maybe if you clock each other as trans people in the street, just having a moment to like acknowledge, it gives you that tiny little piece of feeling safe, just even that tiny little way.
You're not alone. You're not
Yeah.
the only trans person out walking the streets that day. We are out here. That's the thing. When I look back to movements like ACT UP and whatnot, that's the biggest thing I see that I think we could use. Not that we don't have it, we do, but we could use more of is, I have your back. We're gonna figure this out. I don't have the answers, but let's work our networks. Let's text a few people and see what we can come up with.
Yeah.
Even if it's a temporary thing. Well, guess what? If you can find a temporary fix that gets you to the next one, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And it is about getting to the end. It is about, I don't just want to be morally correct. I also want to win.
Yes, and we are. The thing is like, and I know it might not look like a literal marathon when someone crosses the line and they break the ribbon and there's like streamers everywhere and people are cheering, but we are winning and we have to celebrate our own wins. We have to create that. I don't know which parent of mine said it to me once, but I think it might have been my mom actually, but I think she'd said something along the lines of, if you don't celebrate your life achievements, as who's going to? And that's the same for community. We have wins.
100%.
We're having wins. We have visibility beyond any other time in history. We have connection thanks to the internet globally more than any other time in history. There's so much that we should be celebrating, and I hope everyone listening is celebrating. Survival, resistance, and hope. We've talked a little bit about the fear of what's going on, the current climate in the US, how that's affecting us here in Australia, but also the history of queer rights movements and what we have to learn from and draw upon now. And, there's a lot of fear in this moment. But this episode is about something deeper than that. It's about survival and what we already carry as a community. We were talking just before about, some things that we can do. But Faye, tell me, what do you think? What does survival mean to you right now? What does that look like? What does it feel like?
Survival, it means a lot of different things. I think survival on the good days is about planning for the future. It's about assuming you are going to be here next year and making plans for that. On the bad days, survival can be about getting out of work, without having to break down. Can be getting to the next day. I think survival takes a lot of different forms. I think this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but survival is not about surviving. Survival is about thriving. And it's different for a lot of different people. If you're facing housing issues, survival for you will be finding stable housing. If you're having employment issues, survival will be finding stable employment. If you have stable employment, survival might be handling someone transphobic at work. If you are lucky enough to work at a very, very affirming place where no one is outwardly transphobic, survival might be helping someone else get to that point in their journey, in their life. Survival means a lot of different things, and it takes a lot of different forms.
I think classism shows up in the trans community a bit too, right? When...
For sure.
And all the isms affect every community in intersectional ways. For example, I work in community, and I have typically worked in very trans positive spaces. But it doesn't mean that I don't go home shattered some days and scared, even though, a lot of my work tends to involve helping people who don't have work, who are struggling to find work, trans people who don't have work. And that survival is different, right? Like the place that person is in is different from the place that I'm in. And we're both struggling or surviving differently. That's also class divide. Like I have the privilege of that of that job and that position. I think recognizing and having gratitude for the positions that we are all in, whatever they may be, for the little things that we have, is also a great survival tool.
100%, 100%. It is easy to only count the hardships in your life. It, I think, takes a lot more effort to count the blessings in your life.
Oh, and you know what? It's a skill. I really think it's a skill to sit and go, heck, what am I grateful for? Let me just look around my life right now, and I'm just going to think of 5 things. And, you know, just the act, just the literal act of attempting to find something you're grateful for sparks that neuroplasticity, those neurons in your brain to think towards a positive, to think towards something worthwhile.
I fully agree. I think another way to look at it, and I'm looking at a lot of things this way, you know, because you're 100% correct. It is a skill. It is a muscle. If it is something you are struggling with, it might be easier to view it as a practice, a thing that you are actively doing, you know, and then you sort of divorce it from how good you are at it or not, and it just becomes a thing you are doing. You know, to sort of take it out of trans and queer people, you know, something I've been saying a lot now is ally is no longer a descriptor. It has to be a verb. It has to be a practice. What are you doing to be an ally to the trans and queer community? You know, and I think we can apply that to ourselves. How are you practicing having gratitude for the things you do have? And I think that also helps, you know, like I said before, by figuring out what you have, instead of focusing on what you don't have, you might find, wait a minute, this thing that I have, I can share in some way. Then you can find someone who doesn't have that, who is really struggling with the thing you might have abundance of, and help them with that thing they are struggling by giving them some of what you have.
Yeah, it's giving from that overflow. Like we talked about the vessel, you can't give from an empty cup sort of thing, you know. If you've got an overflow of something, we can do that. Yeah. What skills have queer and trans communities always relied on that are becoming crucial again? So, I mean, we did talk a little bit about like how this is a war and not a battle. So, you know, it's a marathon, not a race, but, you know, not a sprint. I've got 4 dot points here: chosen family, underground networks, resource sharing, and storytelling are the 4 things that I've written as like crucial to support community. Chosen family, huge for me. Underground networks, in that, you know, we all are talking to each other about how we get gender affirming medical care and supporting that. Resource sharing, you know, which is again what you'd sort of said as well, being able to give from the overflow of extra things that you might have an abundance of that someone else doesn't. And then the ultimate thing, which is actually what we're doing right now, which is storytelling, sharing information and connecting across oceans and around the world of what's going on. What are your thoughts on those things? What are your thoughts on those 4 things?
I agree with all of them, and I think I am doing all of those in different ways. You know, chosen family. I mean, as long as there have been queer people, there has been chosen family. People forget the full quote. People always go, you know, blood is thicker than water. The full quote: the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. And the point of that is the bonds that we choose to honor amongst each other is so much more important than anything else. You know, I have extended chosen family. I have a gay auntie who lives down in the South. I have a nephew who lives here in New York. None of those people I have blood relations with, but because they are a part of my chosen family, that means those people are also chosen family, as far as I am concerned. You know, something perfect example, I am very lucky that my parents fully accept me for who I am, and they love me, not in spite of it, but because of it, because it is who I am. And so something I tell people is like, if you are a part of my chosen family, those are also, my parents are a part of your chosen family too. You know, you want to talk to Mama Weichsel, you want to talk to Papa Weichsel, I will get them on the phone to talk to you.
I'll give them a call after this.
Exactly. But like,
Yeah.
you know, by doing that, and I implore everyone who is listening to think about who is your chosen family and to think about it with intention. Because I have a lot of queer friends, I have a lot of trans friends. Not everyone is a part of my chosen family. And that's one of the beautiful things about it is we get to choose. We get to choose who I am going to stand by you through thick and thin. I am going to be there for you however I can. And maybe I can't solve every problem. And maybe all I can offer is, yeah, that sucks. But that is someone who goes, yeah, I know what you're going through.
Yeah. 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 So
and that's so important.
Super important.
It's why therapy is so important, and talking to an actual human as opposed to, using an AI as your therapist. The AI doesn't know what it's like to go through heartbreak. A human being with a beating heart does.
Talk to people, chosen family, collect those special to you and connect those special to you. And then, I was saying about underground networks, that's also how we have a community that sends and shares information as well as resources. I was reading about DIY medical transitions, like particularly hormone replacement from like the early 1800s in South America, using certain plants and certain plant medicine that actually helped you develop more masculinizing features, as well as ways of presenting and taking care of your skin for more feminizing. We've been sharing resources for hundreds of years through our own pathways and networks. This is a skill that we will continue to retain.
Speaking of underground networks, I think if everyone who's listening hasn't done so, and frankly, I think probably a lot have had, you should download Signal. Now, is Signal an automatically safe way to message? No, it isn't. But it's safer than your regular SMS. It's encrypted end to end. It has to be broken into for someone to get access to your messages. Again, if someone has the key, they're going to get in, but they got to have that key first, versus your normal messages are frankly very easy to intercept. If you live in the Western world, you live under a surveillance state.
Faye, tell me, what does hope look like? Not necessarily as a feeling, not necessarily as a practice, but just like what, we've talked a lot about survival, but hope is really this prevailing, this line all the way through this discussion today. But what is hope? What is it feeling like? What does it look like?
Hope is knowing there will be a tomorrow. Hope is planning for your future. Hope is sometimes calling the doctor and getting your first appointment for HRT. Hope can be asking that person you like out. Hope can be applying to that job that you're not sure you have the qualifications for. Hope can be going out to that punk show that you don't think you're going to look like you fit in, but going anyway, doing it scared. I think a really important thing to realize right now is people sometimes tell me, Faye, you're so brave. You just do what you want to do. You speak truth to power, whatever. And the thing is, I tell people all the time is I am doing this stuff and I am scared.
Yeah, babe.
But you can't not. It is an impossibility to be courageous and to be brave unless you are scared. Being scared and doing the right thing is being courageous. Because if you weren't scared, you would just be acting. You would just be doing. And that's not what being courageous and brave is about. The bravery, the courage comes because you have doubts. It comes because you're not sure how it's going to work out. And you do it anyway because you think the world could be better. My situation could be better.
There's a really fantastic Brené Brown quote about courage, which is, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both.
100%.
Yeah.
You're listening to Transmission on 4ZZZ, having a chat there with Fae from New York. Gosh, she's amazing. I'm now going to leave you on a speech that Fae actually gave at a Vigil a while ago. Yeah, I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much for listening to Transmission. Yeah, let's listen to this amazing speech.
So what I would like to read as a sort of ending here is I was at, when Sam Nordquist was killed in New York State, I was asked to speak at a vigil for him in Jersey City. And I'd just like to read what I wrote then, because I think it really hits to a lot of the things we have been talking about. So here we go. Thank you for having me to speak. While I wish we were gathering in joy rather than mourning, I am touched and heartened that I see all of you out here with us today, because that's what we need in this moment, to not be isolated, not be alone, but to be in community with each other. My name is Fae Weichsel, and I am a union member and organizer. I was born into a union family, and I've been active in my union for over a decade, fighting both for queer rights and labor rights. I know the power in collective action and community coming together for the common good. That is what we need right now. Solidarity with our trans brothers. Solidarity with our entire trans community. Solidarity with and from not only the queer community, but the entire community. It's a scary time to be a trans person in America. I know it. You know it. We live it. I am speaking to the choir today. We know the harm that comes to our community. We've all had to help fellow trans and queer kin heal, recover, and process this harm and often trauma. Now is the time that requires action. If not us, who? If not now, when? If not here, where? But what are we to do? What are we to do when we are beset on all sides? It's a time to look at our queer and trans history. Our community is one of struggle and strife, but also of victory. We did not get a better treatment by asking the cops at Stonewall nicely. We did not get HIV medications by being patient. We did not get AIDS treatment by being quiet. We did not get PrEP by being good. We got it by acting up. Silence equals death. It's true. Hyper-invisibility is not a shield. Hyper-visibility is not a sword. These are things we know, and we are a community that comes from all walks of life, so many varied backgrounds. We know the meaning of family. Various reasons and circumstances make our community one deeply familiar with found family. Many of us have extended found family networks. I have brothers, kin, and sisters with whom I share no blood. Blood is thicker than water? No, I reject that. The quote is about the blood of the covenant being thicker than water. I am in covenant with all trans people. I cannot and will not let them go alone in this world we find ourselves in. All trans people are family. I want to read the words of Linda Nordquist, Sam's mother, in regards to trying to find her son. At least Sam could possibly hear my voice and know, Mom's here. Mom's looking. We need to be each other's family and look for each other and continue to keep looking out for each other. Make sure your family is safe and okay. Check in on each other. Form stronger bonds between us, because together, we have a power greater than the sum of its parts. To take a term from our queer history, an army of lovers cannot lose. A lot of us are afraid. I will tell you, I am afraid. But you cannot be courageous without fear. Being courageous involves being afraid and acting anyway, not in a dangerous, reckless way, not letting fear rule our lives. If we can conquer the fear within ourselves to transition to show the world who we really are, then it is also on us, and I mean also my cis kin here as well. It is on all of us to conquer the fear within ourselves, to show up and be there for our family in this time, for trans people to stand up for ourselves and for our cis comrades to stand with us. We have a long fight ahead of us. Something I would like to leave you with is this thought of mine. No one can save everyone, but everyone can save someone. Look for who you can save. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening to Transmission. Catch us every Monday live on 4ZZZ from 10 a.m. or listen to our podcast on the Community Radio Plus app.